The goal of this video lecture is to provide a brief overview of the sociocultural approach to psychopathology, including ways in which this approach can be applied to explain the development of psychopathology and interventions consistent with this approach. A major difference between the sociocultural approach to psychopathology and the other approaches we've discussed is that the sociocultural approach emphasizes the importance of the social and cultural context in which an individual is embedded, rather than emphasizing internal characteristics or processes within the individual. From the sociocultural approach, psychopathology can be conceptualized as being caused by sociocultural factors. For example, societal problems like discrimination or inequitable access to resources might lead to the development of psychological symptoms or maladaptive behaviors. Another element of the sociocultural approach is its emphasis on the need to understand behavior and experiences in the context of individuals' social identities, such as their gender, race, or class. From this perspective, we cannot fully explain an individual's experiences without considering the ways in which their experiences have been shaped by these elements of their identity. One sociocultural approach to psychopathology suggests that individual behavioral or emotional difficulties reflect larger societal problems. For example, structural inequality, discrimination, differential access to resources, or poverty. We know that members of specific groups are more likely to experience stressors related to their group membership. For example, in the United States, Black and Indigenous people are more likely to experience racism, both in overt forms, such as harassment, and in more subtle forms, such as through microaggressions. Over time, the cumulative effects of these stressful experiences can lead to the development of emotional and behavioral difficulties. Another sociocultural approach highlights the ways in which elements of social identity may affect individuals' behavior and experiences. These include a wide range of characteristics, ranging from race and ethnicity or gender identity and expression, through socioeconomic status, disability, or religious beliefs. We often see differences in the prevalence of psychopathology between members of different groups. For example, women are more likely to experience depression than men. Interestingly, in the United States, white Americans have higher rates of psychological disorders compared to Latinx and Black Americans. However, Latinx and Black Americans on average experience psychological disorders that are more chronic or persistent than those of white Americans. When we're discussing differences in psychopathology between groups, it's important to be careful when we interpret what these differences might mean. For example, if we identify gender differences, there are a wide range of possible explanations, ranging from physiological explanations, like differences in genetics or sex hormone exposure, to social experiences, such as the experience of sexism or differential exposure to sexual harassment or assault. From a sociocultural perspective, it's important for us to identify ways in which an individual's identity affects their experiences and how these experiences might relate to their emotions or behaviors. Finally, the sociocultural approach emphasizes the importance of recognizing that conceptions of mental health and illness vary across cultures. It's important to recognize that the definitions of psychopathology as it's defined in the DSM have been determined by a specific group of people, largely psychiatrists working in the United States who've historically tended to be white and of high socioeconomic status. Different kinds of behaviors and experiences may or may not be labeled abnormal or pathological in different cultures. In addition, it's important to consider the role of mental health stigma in contributing to individuals' psychological difficulties. For example, people who are labeled as mentally ill may be discriminated against in occupational or educational settings and may have greater difficulty accessing resources like housing and medical care. This discrimination and lack of access can lead to further difficulties. Thus, it's important for us to consider whether ways in which the dominant culture defines mental health might actually contribute to individuals' experiences with emotional or behavioral difficulties. Rather than focusing on intervening at the level of the individual, from the sociocultural approach, our interventions address psychopathology by intervening in these broader social and cultural problems. From this perspective, one way to reduce psychopathology is to address the societal problems and structural inequities that contribute to increased stress and greater problems in specific groups. For example, rates of depression and suicidality are high among transgender youth. These youth also report experiencing high levels of harassment related to gender identity and gender expression. However, transgender youth who are provided with gender-affirming care and who have strong social support experience much lower rates of depression and suicidality. Addressing the harassment and discrimination experienced by this group results in improvements to their psychological well-being. Another important way to address psychopathology is to provide individuals with access to meaningful social roles and opportunities for social connection. When mental illness is highly stigmatized, individuals who are labeled as mentally ill are often not fully able to participate in important parts of society, such as maintaining employment. Addressing stigma and ensuring that individuals have opportunities to be meaningful and integrated members of society can reduce their emotional and behavioral difficulties. Finally, the sociocultural approach emphasizes the importance of cultural competence in interventions. Cultural competence includes a number of important elements. One element is sensitivity. It's important for clinicians to recognize the role of culture and identity in individual experiences. It's also important for clinicians to develop awareness and knowledge of cultures other than their own. This can also take the form of cultural adaptations to interventions, in which interventions are designed specifically to address the needs, preferences, or norms of specific groups.